Hi everyone, and welcome back to High School of Mathematical Oncology. I'm Isaac Jung, high school senior working in Dr. Russell Rockney's lab at City of Hope. This channel is all about helping students like me dive into the field of mathematical oncology by talking to the people actually shaping the field. Today, I'm super excited to be speaking with Dr. Jacob Scott. He's a physician scientist in the Department of Radiation Oncology at the Cleveland Clinic and an associate professor at Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine. He's a leader in the use of mathematical models to study cancer evolution, resistance, and treatments, and his journey into this field is pretty unique. Dr. Scott, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Please call me Jake.
Of course. Okay. Yeah, so let's start from the beginning. You've had a really unique path from nuclear submarines and physics teaching to becoming a physician scientist in oncology. Could
Mhm.
you share a bit about your journey and what drew you to combine medicine with math and modeling?
Yeah, sure. I think I I didn't have like a grand plan to start out with. So that like let's start there. I think when I was in high school, when I was maybe your age, what year are you?
Senior.
Yeah, I was really interested in physics and engineering, and my entire worldview was I want to go to the Naval Academy. I want to serve in the Navy. I like physics. I like Dungeons and Dragons. That was about all I knew about life. And then, I played sports and did other stuff too, but I had no idea about medicine or mathematical modeling or oncology or any of these things. And so I went to college. I enjoyed physics. I graduated, joined the Navy, which is a requirement after the Naval Academy, and spent time on a submarine learning about how the engineering plant works and how this big, beautiful, complex system that is a submarine runs, weapons, power, all this. But then when I was getting out, so you owe 5 years to pay back for your college. When I was getting out, I was trying to figure out what to do next, and I didn't really know what to do. My dad was a high school English teacher. My mom was a perennial gardener, and so there wasn't anyone in my family who'd done science or medicine or engineering. And so I didn't really know where to go next. So I kind of applied broadly, and I got into both physics PhD programs and med school, and kind of chose medicine as a lark. It seemed like a good idea. It seemed like a good job after you got done with school. I just got married, wanted to have kids. It made sense, and got some advice from friends who were physicians to give it a try. So I did. I came here to Cleveland, actually right across the street from where I am now, to medical school, and really, really loved it. Um, but as I finished medicine or medical school, kind of left me wanting a little bit more. I think in medicine in particular, um, there's not a lot of what I'd call rigorous understanding of how this big system works. When I say rigorous in this sense, I mean mathematical. A submarine, you can like write down governing equations for all the systems. And you can a little bit in medicine, but a lot less. And so it kind of, um, I don't know, it was a little frustrating. And so I ended up choosing radiation oncology, which is the kind of medicine I practice, because I really like the radiation part. I like the the certainty of the physics that was behind it. But as I did my training in, after 4 years of med school, you have to do 5 years of oncology training. And as I was doing that, I was a little frustrated by, I had the certainty of the physics, and I knew exactly what I was delivering radiation-wise to patients. And I was confident in that because there's governing first principles that have equations behind them. But then the outcomes weren't certain. So I could do the same thing to two patients, exactly the same thing, and I was certain that it was exactly the same thing, and two very different things would happen because there's all this uncertainty in the biology. And that drove me back once more to the classroom, and drove me to want to do a PhD in applied math, and specifically mathematical biology. And it was a desire to continually do better and better for my patients and do better and better to understand what was going on inside them that drove that once more, going back to the drawing board. And then finishing that PhD, I think I was 35 when I started. Um, Started a laboratory here doing math, and the PhD was in mathematical oncology and applied math, and sort of starting a lab up in what made sense to me for the first time. I think 40 years old was my first job, but if for the first time made sense to me what I was doing. And that's where how I got here. That was 9 years ago.
Yeah, that's a really cool story. Actually, I'd like to go back to what you're saying about how like you do the same treatment for the two different patients and there'd be drastically different results.
Mhm.
So, you've done a lot of pioneering work showing how radiation therapy can be personalized using tumor biology and modeling. So,
Mhm.
why is the traditional one-size-fits-all approach to dosing limited, and how does math move us forward towards more personalized treatments? Sorry, there's just this glare I'm trying to
I
figure
can see
out.
it. Yeah. You turn the light off behind you, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I guess, yeah, that works.
There you go. I mean, I think you hit on the central tenet here, which is that p patients are different, tumors are different. There's this idea of heterogeneity between them, and our field, radiation oncology, has embraced that in that there's anatomical differences and differences between one tumor type and another. So we treat prostate cancer differently than we treat lung cancer, for example. But to the level of inter-tumor type heterogeneity, so patient to patient to patient, lung cancer to lung cancer to lung cancer, we have not yet adopted a differential approach based on tumor genomics, for example. That's just one of many ways you could treat differently. And why that's the case, I'm not 100% sure, but I do know that, the personalized medicine revolution occurred 20 years ago, and our field is still catching up. And so some of the work we have done has tried to link genomics to actionable mathematical models. And that's really been a central tenet of I'd say maybe a quarter of our lab's work has been focused around that. So I think it's a combination of actually quite simple mathematical models together with our understanding of tumor genomics and biology to try to differentiate patients who are more or less sensitive to radiation so we can treat them appropriately.
Yeah, that sounds, yeah, that's a really powerful way of rethinking treatments, like moving away and trying to make it like catch up to personalized medicine using
Hmm.
math. Um,
Hmm.
so could you share a real world example where mathematical modeling was used to improve a treatment plan for a patient or change like a medical decision?
That's a tough one. I mean, I think that mathematical oncology is still working towards that, with a few exceptions. I think there are some adaptive therapy mathematical models which are based on ecological control, in which patients are being treated with different doses or different timings of chemotherapies. And those are based on some mathematical formalisms called evolutionary game theory. There's certainly a ton of examples in medical oncology where drug choice is governed by computational, I won't say models, but at least computational reasoning, where the genome has been understood through those lenses, and so the existence of certain mutations has been found to mean you're more sensitive to one treatment or another. But and in radiation oncology, we're really close. We're just now accruing our first clinical trials, and patients have been treated, but the numbers are low. It's only a handful so far. So I think we're really on the horizon, or the change for that is on the horizon. That's getting closer, and that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's really cool. Just I guess it's been like you said 20 years of like since personalized medicine.
Yeah.
Or
But
yeah, sounds like
mathematical oncology has only been a field for 12, maybe.
yeah, so I mean, I guess 12 years like just almost there, just maybe a couple more and it'll be in
And
there.
I think we're really close. There are clinical trials now and I should say that there were some clinical trials at Dana-Farber in lung cancer a few years ago that again looked at scheduling of treatment. Maybe it's the same drug, but you give it at a different tempo or a different frequency based on biomarkers of response. And those have been put into mathematical models, but it's still not normal. It's still, I'd say, experimental.
You've also described cancer as sort of an evolutionary disease, constantly adapting to treatments. So what does this mean? And how would that change the way we think about treating cancer?
Yeah, great question. So I think that evolution is maybe the most interesting thing to study. Not even cancer evolution, just evolution. And I think, if there's anything true about life is that it evolves. We can even remember back to Jurassic Park, life will find a way. And tumors are the same. They're not their own life forms, but they're living things in a way. And so I think the minute you reframe tumors to be evolving systems, a few things happen. One, it becomes relatively obvious why our treatments eventually all fail, because evolution is just an incredible search algorithm. That's and it's it's you have 10 to the 12th cells that have very large complex genomes that are constantly messing around with their message. And that's a lot of individual agents seeking for a solution, right? You think about the world where we have agentic processes that are, autonomously looking for solutions. You now have 10 to the 12th things, cells, running a powerful search algorithm. Guess what? You're going to find a solution. And so from my perspective, it's sort of obvious once you frame it that way that all of our treatments will eventually get beaten by this system. So what we're trying to do is sort of reframe our thinking to study that system and ask, can we mess with the evolutionary process itself in a way that either break it or prevent it from functioning or slow it down or something like that?
Yeah, as you said, like eventually every like the cancer will find a way around it.
Mhm.
So, I guess what are some methods that can be used to help anticipate or slow down this resistance to treatment?
That's a tough one. I mean, I think that's the focus of many, many people's careers right now. And so our our hypothesis is that the study of the evolutionary process itself can slow that down. So can we design treatments with the evolutionary process in mind, such that we kind of accept the fact that any treatment's going to fail eventually, and instead of just trying to find, the words we use are play whack-a-mole, so wait for it to fail and then change. So a reactionary approach. Can we do something that's not reactionary, but that's sort of taking advantage of it. And so, like playing, an analogy we use is like playing chess, not checkers. Can you really think a few steps ahead? But you can't do that until you understand the rules of the game, right? You can't imagine that someone might move their knight over there if you don't know how a knight moves. And so I think that it's that process of dissecting the process of evolution or dissecting the algorithm that is evolution is, I think, where my group's work is mostly focused.
Yeah, that's a really cool idea that cancer cells are like you're playing a game of cancer cells, you have to figure out the rules of the game in order to
Yeah.
eventually hopefully beat it.
Yeah, yeah,
And
exactly.
so like your lab has used game theory to model tumors as systems, with like competing players or strategies.
Mhm.
How does thinking of cancer this way help us design smarter or more adaptive treatments?
Well, I think it's sort of all bundled up together with the evolutionary argument we just had. I think, if you think about the really big wins with AI and machine learning recently in scenarios that are similar, chess has long ago been beaten by machine learning algorithms, and recently Go and a number of other super highly complex difficult games. But those are games where the rules are known. And so evolutionary game theory, for example, is one version of a description of the rules. It's an imperfect simplification, but it's maybe a useful version of the rules. And so I think anytime we write down a mathematical model, it's basically a description of a rule, right? You say, hey, I believe I hypothesize that the population behaves in this way. So you can say what goes up must come down. That's a behavior. But you can also write down Newton's laws and say, if I know the impulse up and the force of gravity down and the air resistance, it still implies what goes up must come down. But you now have a rigorous description of that process rather than this um, more abstract version of what goes up must come down. So I think anytime we write down any mathematical model of these processes, what we're really doing is just codifying our hypothesis in a rigorous mathematical language. And so game theory is just one way you can describe things. It's not right. It's actually definitely wrong, but it might have enough about it that's correct, enough truth in it that we can move forward. And so I think that anytime you're doing a mathematical model, it's going to be wrong in some important way. But if there's enough rightness to it that you can have it as useful, that's the other classic argument. All models are wrong, but some are useful. Um, then I think that that's sort of the way we think about how the math model can help us.
Yeah, I guess would like a somewhat accurate comparison be I believe you can like launch a rocket understanding Newtonian physics, but something like a satellite, eventually you need to start going into Einstein's theories and sort of like
Yeah,
refining it down.
yeah.
So
Well, you can launch a rocket even without,
oh, well,
but,
yeah, I
but
guess, but
you could get to the moon even with just Newtonian mechanics, right? But you're right. Once you're moving a satellite and trying to understand how quickly things are, you're trying to triangulate, you can't have GPS without relativity. but we got to the moon without it. But that's again, so you can get further and further with better and better models.
Yeah, speaking about like those better models, for students who might not understand, could you speak about fitness landscapes and hypercubes?
Sure. First of all, that's drawn all over my chalkboard over here, so it's dear to my soul and today. So, hypercubes, or I guess maybe if it's high school students listening, tesseracts, like in the Marvel movies, which are just basically cubes of higher dimension than three, are very nice, well-behaved mathematical objects on which you can do algebra, on which you can perform simulations. They're objects that behave well, right? They're things that we know how the connections work. They're also, for almost 100 years now, the way that we've conceptualized, well, so almost 100 years ago in 1932, the hypercube was first described as a way to understand differences in organisms. We didn't even know about genes back then, but it used to be called different allelomorphs. So you might remember from middle school or high school biology, the idea of a Punnett square, where you have like a rabbit with short ears and long ears, and that's a zero or a one. And then you have a fast or a slow version of that rabbit. And now you have four types: fast with long ears, fast with short ears, slow with long ears, slow with fast ears. And that makes a square of possible rabbits. One, two, three, four. If you add a third allele to that, you go from a square to a cube, from a two cube to a two cube to a three cube, as we call it. And similarly, you can extend that into n dimensions. And so you can also represent the whole genome that way. So you can say, hey, what if I have a huge long string of ones and zeros, for example? You can represent it in that way. And so a fitness landscape is simply a mapping from the possibilities that are represented by one of those cubes. So each corner of those cubes, each corner of the square is a type of rabbit, the other type of rabbit, a fourth type of rabbit. You then ask the question, how fit is each of those types? And so you go from a representation of the genome that's like a square, but then each of those corners now has a hill or a height associated with it, a fitness associated with it. And so now you have sort of a map of with hills and valleys. And you can write down equations of motion that follow Darwin's laws that say all things must get fitter. So you write down probability models, probabilistic models where things go uphill more often than they do other ways. And it's a really nice way to think about modeling populations. And what I think is really nice about it as well is that for the most part, you can connect those objects to experimental results. So, I think some of the most beautiful math in the world is abstract and will never be quote unquote made real. Especially in math bio, we have these abstract versions which might teach us philosophically about scenarios, but maybe aren't actionalizable. And so what I like about some of these models is that they are something you can test in the lab or parameterize in the lab. You can go to the laboratory, you can get those four kinds of rabbits, and you can measure how fast they go, or measure how many, what the reproductive rate is. And the same goes with cancer cells or bacteria or whatever it is you're studying.
Yeah, it sounds like those are some really powerful tools that can be used like just trying to figure out like what conditions make it less likely for cancer cells to survive, or I mean, even like different types of drugs, like which one order, type,
Mhm.
dosage, all of that.
That's exactly right. So you can follow populations as they move through these large scale maps and asks how they change as they move.
Yeah, so what are some of the biggest challenges when trying to build a model that can actually predict how cancer progresses or responds to therapy?
It's all hard. I think the most important thing isn't what model you build. The most important thing is what question you're asking. And so I would focus back to the question because you can build 100 different models in any scenario, but the quality of the model really depends on what the question itself is. So if you're asking a question about evolutionary flows or treatment optimization or whatever it is, the model you'll build is different. And it also depends on the time scale of the question. It also depends on the length scale of the question and the resolution of the data or lack of resolution of the data. And so I think the question you're asking should be, how do you ask the right question or how do you come upon the right thing to study? And that's a tough one. Some of that's more art than science, if you will.
Yeah. Um, I guess I was also wondering about gene expression, such as like non-coding RNA or microRNA that like there's a lot of new data about how they might impact what was it called? Like epigenetics, I think it's called.
Mhm.
So how can we use those molecular signals in models to predict how cancer might grow or respond to treatment?
Yeah, great question. Again, it comes down to the specific question you're asking because you could have the highest quality data in the whole world, and if it's not related to the question you're asking, who cares? You know, you could give me a perfect map of the entire, you know, whatever galaxy that exists far, far away, and it's never going to help me figure out how to predict what my son wants for dinner. And so I think the same thing goes here, where, yes, we have amazing data on non-coding RNAs and epigenetics and genome architecture and chromatin structure. But if the questions you're asking are about sort of large-scale population dynamics, maybe there's a disconnect. So again, thinking about how to connect this a beautiful, tiny scale, atomic or molecular at least resolution data to the large scale problem of a tumor that's the size of your fist is a tough one. And I think that mathematical models are uniquely suited to connect those scales. So maybe you can write down a model of, molecular dynamics within one cell and then use a mathematical model to scale that up. But at some point, scale separations like that become really, really difficult. So in physics, there's this idea of a grand unified theory where you have like a quantum mechanical model together with a gravitational model. Usually they never come together because if you're talking about gravity, you're talking about big things and quantum effects don't matter. If you're talking about tiny things, they're so small gravity doesn't matter, and all that matters is quantum effects. So you kind of have this like huge separation, whereas quantum over here and gravity over here. Now, the reality of the universe is that both things are important, but depending on the question you're asking, you can very safely ignore one or the other. And I think the same thing goes here. It comes back to the question you're asking. Is the question you're asking about the mechanism of mutation or the mechanism of genome architecture and regulation? Or is the question you're asking about how a tumor that's 10 to the 12th things will behave when you give it a drug? And so I think I'm dodging your question a little bit, but I think what it comes down to is sort of, really understanding the scale at which the question you're asking operates on, and then looking for data that informs that scale directly. Now, you could argue, hey, the genome informs all scales. You're not wrong. But again, there's so many steps and so much going on in between that maybe it doesn't really matter directly.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense actually. Just a lot of things are like different questions, different scales. Yeah, that makes sense. Just it's
Yeah.
harder to
Yeah.
generalize some things.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
Yeah.
Or it may be impossible for now, at least.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, how do you balance the you've mentioned in your work it's really important to balance between rigorous science and the urgent needs of patients. So
Mhm.
how do you do that, especially with like more complex models that, let's say, like it tells you something that might not make sense intuitively?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'll try to answer your question, but I'll also answer a little bit of a different one. So, for example, this morning I was in clinic from 8 to noon, and I was taking care of a number of different cancer patients with a bunch of different problems. And I'll tell you that there was no mathematical modeling in my morning. Well, actually, that's not entirely true because radiation planning is actually a mathematical model of where it goes. But the idea is that, I didn't use any models of biology to deeply understand my individual patient's problems. I used well-established standards of care, which have been established for a long time based on clinical trials and evidence-based medicine. But then when I came back over to my laboratory, the building I'm in now, I had to take that hat off and put on a different hat. And when I'm in the clinic, I have to have a hat on that says, I know the right answer for this treatment based on this evidence. I've taken my boards, I'm licensed, I have to do the right thing, even though I know that it won't always work. When I'm in this building and I'm a scientist, I'm supposed to question everything. I'm supposed to doubt everything and constantly poke holes in everything. And so it's really a little bit of a dichotomous headspace or partially schizophrenic headspace where on one side I'm supposed to be certain of what I'm doing, which is I am. I'm good at what I do clinically. It's the right thing based on textbooks and clinical trials and evidence-based medicine, but it doesn't work for everybody. Well, why doesn't it work for everybody? Well, it doesn't work for everybody because there's some fundamental things about it that are lacking full understanding. Now, that's why we live in this building as well, to really delve deeply into that full understanding. But if I tried to understand every little mechanistic detail about every little patient's tumor, it's impossible. You could never do that. And so there really is, again, a separation between the reality of today's oncology, which will not be tomorrow's oncology or next year's oncology, but it's today and delivering excellent care today. And then coming back to the research building and saying, how can we do better? What is it that's wrong and what can I learn?
Yeah. That's interesting. Yeah. Also, AI and machine learning. How do you see them impacting the field of mathematical modeling as like both as a tool and also as it connects to other fields like interdisciplinary work?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's already touching every facet of our lives. I think that some of the things it's really good at already are assimilating large, sparse, heterogeneous data sets. It's really helping us understand. One of the problems is we have all this big data, but most of it wasn't collected purposefully, if you will. The electronic medical record, for example, I work at a huge hospital, Cleveland Clinic. There's an enormous amount of data on all these patients who've ever been treated. But it's very different when you're a scientist and you say, I have this specific hypothesis, I'm going to collect this specific data, or even in a clinical trial, I have a specific hypothesis for every patient, I'm going to collect exactly the same thing and analyze that. In real world data, it's a bit messier, right? I mean, patients come in once every 2 weeks, or not, they miss an appointment, or it's hot and they got sick and they're admitted for something else. And, it's messy. It's the real world. And so machine learning and AI are really helping us to assimilate some of those things into a better, I'm not going to say understanding, but a better way of understanding the data. I do think in math onco in particular, it's also helping us with connecting models to data. 'Cause again, it's that messy data part. I can write down a mathematical model and I'll get an exact answer. Or if it's a stochastic model, I'll get an exact ensemble of answers. Then the question is how do you connect that over to reality? And I think that connection is going to be something that AI and ML help us with a ton. It's also changing the way people code. It's changing the need for certain kinds of education. It's going to change medical education immensely. I just saw yesterday that the one of the new LLMs got 100% on the medical boards. And so it's like, hey, if this computer program can get 100% of the boards, should my student doctors be memorizing all that stuff? Or should they be taught how to use this tool that knows the answers to the basics such that they can kind of rise above and perform a different task? And I think that's a really open question that's being solved in real time.
Yeah. I mean, AI is going to have a huge impact on a lot of students watching these videos.
Absolutely.
So,
I'm sure every single student watching this video has used AI today.
probably I used it a bit for like I asked it
What question
like
should
a
I
lot of
ask? Yeah.
information. Do you think it's a good idea to ask this question?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
just
yeah,
like
yeah.
helps guide.
No, it's a great sounding board. It's a great place to generate ideas. It's a great place to, it's a conversation you can have that's private for now with a sounding board, and it's a nice, it's an amazing tool that we're all learning how to use, right? And it's exciting.
Yeah, so a lot of students watching this, myself included, are really excited about working at the intersection between math and medicine.
Hmm.
We're also trying to figure out what that path would look like. So
Hmm.
from your perspective, what are the most important skills and areas we should start learning now or in the near future?
Great question. And I think if you asked me this question in 6 months or 6 months ago, I'd give you a different answer because AI is changing a lot of this. Um, And I'm also a little biased because my undergrad was in physics, and I do think that that's helped me a lot because, what is physics? Physics is the study of the natural world, and it's largely based in the language of mathematics. And so it set me up really well to study something that's in the natural world, the human condition, with a mathematical mindset. And I do think that even if ChatGPT can do your math homework for you, it's not about doing your homework. It's about learning how to think in that way. And so I do think that, you know, a firm understanding of the basic sciences, and I would argue the STEM sciences, math, physics, chemistry, biology, is still massively important. And that won't change. And learning how to think critically is never going to be a skill that is not useful. And I think, like I said earlier, the thing that ChatGPT and those other LLMs and large scale models can't quite do yet is ask the great questions. And so I think the place that we as humans still offer the most value. Now, on the physician side, there's also the empathy, right? Talking to patients, working with them, doing the surgeries, doing the procedures. But on the scientific side, you know, asking sharp questions and having that creative spark is still where, for now, we're uniquely qualified. And so I would argue that sharpening your question answering or your question asking machinery is the place that I would push students. And I think that the best place to do that is through the basic sciences. And I think those are still going to be incredibly important. But I'd also argue that, I've got high school age kids, and I think the most important thing for anyone to do is chase what they're passionate about. And so if something strikes your fancy and it looks and it wakes you up in the morning and gets you excited about it, that's what you should be chasing. And if that changes, you shouldn't be afraid to also change. I think one thing I hate to see folks get stuck in is, I am gonna be a craniofacial surgeon, and because I've always wanted to be. And then when they turn 18 or 22, their mind changes, and maybe they want to be a veterinarian, or maybe they want to be a chemist or a poet. But darn it, they've been wanting to be a craniofacial surgeon since they were 12, so they're gonna be. I think that the capacity to change and learn new things is also a beautiful thing in humans. So I'd say, chase what you're most excited about and what you're passionate about. Because the world's gonna look really different when you're 30 than it does when you're 20, and than it does today, for those under 20. So I think that would be my advice.
Yeah, that's especially with the like constantly changing um environment. Yeah, it's really thank you for that. Thank you for that advice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you've said that scientific research isn't just about equations and facts, but also about like the ideas and ethics behind it. So, what should young scientists keep in mind about this as they grow in their careers?
Well, first of all, if you compromise your scientific ethics, there's nothing else. So keep those near and dear to your heart, because I think the minute you compromise those, it's hard to move forward. Um, and I think I still believe. I mean, I'm biased because I am a scientist, but I do believe there's something noble about the search for truth, and I think that's what we are doing. Just as theologians and philosophers search for truth, so do scientists. And I think that, as do artists. And I think that any of these creative disciplines take a lot out of you, take a lot out of you, but also offer you a lot back. And so, um, and they all come with a lot of rejection, and imposter syndrome. I still feel it every single day. I'm ostensibly successful in my job. I've made it to full professor. I got promoted last year. You didn't see that in your, yeah, but at the same time, like I've gone all the way up, and I look around and I'm like, gosh, am I supposed to be here? Do I know what I'm talking about? How can I keep up with these kids that are so smart? I think that, and my papers still get rejected all the time, and my ideas are laughed at all the time. And I think just having some uh, a strong sense of what you're doing and why is really important, because any creative discipline, any discipline that matters, is going to come with rejection, is going to come with other folks. People don't like change. And if you suggest that there's a new way to understand the world, a lot of people are going to laugh at you. A lot of people are going to dismiss you until maybe you're correct and the world is described that way. And then everyone's going to take it for granted that it was that way all the time. And that's a sort of constant cycle of novelty in any discipline, whether it be artistic or scientific. Um, and I think that's just important to remember, is that um, that's the natural way of thinking.
Yeah, that's really great advice. How things always just like I guess there's always going to be challenges in the path and doubt and all that, but it's just really important to like do what you love and try keep on going for it.
Stick with it.
Um,
Yeah. There's always if you're doing anything meaningful, it's going to be hard. And but that doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. But it does make it difficult. And so make sure you have friends, make sure you stay true to yourself, and make sure you keep after it.
yeah. One last question. If there's like any piece of advice you'd give to like a student that's not necessarily going to mathematical modeling, but science, STEM, and those fields in general, what would it be?
I think beyond what I've said, I'm not sure, but I guess maybe trying to sum up, I think don't be afraid to question the status quo. Because when I started medical school, how about this? I teach a class every year in the medical school, and every single thing I teach in that class was unknown when I sat in that class. And so just remember that the world that you're taught, the truths that you're taught today are probably not true, especially in difficult scientific disciplines. And so it's your job, your generation's job, to prove me wrong. And just like it was my job to prove my previous generation wrong. So you can look at that the positive way and say we stand on the shoulders of giants. But at some point, the giants can be wrong. In the 1700s, we thought that the entirety of human physiology could be boiled down to four humors: phlegm, bile, and whatever the other two were. Those were the correct answers on the medical boards 300 years ago. Now we laugh at that, right? And I think it's your job to make it so that my discoveries are laughably wrong in 20 years. And so keep at it. Keep asking good questions.
Yeah, Dr. Scott, thank you so much for speaking with me today. This has been a really eye-opening conversation, like not just cancer and math and all that, but also like the importance of thinking about new questions and how we approach solving these questions. To all the students watching, we'll link Dr. Scott's lab and publications in the description if you want to dive deeper. Thanks again, Dr. Scott, for talking with me today. Your time and insights meant a lot.
Thanks for the interest, Isaac, and take care, everybody.